Back in 2015, Games Workshop made the decision to blow up the world of Warhammer by taking their fantasy game Outback, telling it to look at the pretty flowers while pointing the barrel of a shotgun at the back of its once mighty head. That shot rang out across the tabletop world, resulting in tables being flipped, tears being wept, and a select few people who hated money to burn their old armies in fits of childlike rage. Warhammer Fantasy was dead, and it paved the way for Age of Sigmar, a skirmish army game that trimmed the fat from the old world and introduced a new generation to Warhammer. The king is dead. Long live the king. Fast forward to the 15th of November 2019, and an article was released on the Warhammer community website titled Old World, New Warhammer. As you can imagine, the rumours around this announcement went absolutely wild. I personally thought that Games Workshop's venture into specialist games such as Blood Bowl and Necromunda meant that the Old World was actually a way to revisit the classic small-scale game Warmaster. But no, this was debunked not long after. Warhammer Fantasy was returning. I grew up with Warhammer Fantasy, my first ever army being Night Goblins towards the end of 5th edition. So that nostalgia train hit me hard, and I started to get excited and relive my childhood. But then I started to get worried. The accepted reason that Warhammer Fantasy was originally discontinued was that it was no longer a financially viable option for the company. It just wasn't making enough money. When you look at the game towards the end of its life, it's easy to see why. Any viable army could end up costing the average consumer hundreds of pounds just to get started. The game was focused on having whole regiments of units. Sometimes each regiment could consist upwards of 40 models strong. That's a lot of models to buy, assemble, paint, and then occasionally play, unless you dedicated the majority of your spare time to the hobby. Fantasy also had to compete with Warhammer 40k, its sci-fi, bigger, and to a lot of people cooler sibling. For years the game was in slow decline, being pushed into the shadows as the tabletop world grew and other game systems became available to play. Much faster, sleeker games that don't necessarily require a bank loan to get into. The second-hand market didn't help as well. Why spend a lot of money on a unit of Chaos Warriors when you could get them on eBay for a fraction of the price? So, why am I worried about the return of the Old World? In my mind, nothing has really changed. It is still incredibly expensive to get into the tabletop hobby, even more so with the cost of living crisis, both domestically and internationally. Aha! I hear you cry. What about all those people who kept their old models? They can just dust them off, put them on the table as if nothing had happened. Yeah, that's great, and a lot of people will do that. I wish I kept some of my old models to do the same. The issue with this is that apart from buying the new rulebooks, Games Workshop, now known as just Warhammer, won't see any large profits from the release. With the 2 new starter boxes, Bretonnians and the Tomb Kings of Khemri, a large majority of the models are older sculpts, so if you already own these models, the chances of you wanting to buy those boxes are lower than if everything had brand new sculpts. On top of that, the Old World is being released at an earlier time period than the previous version of Fantasy, decades before the Siege of Prague. The core factions for the Old World will be Empire of Man, Dwarven Mountain Holds, Kingdom of Bretonnia, Wood Elf Realms, High Elf Realms, Orc and Goblin Tribes, Warriors of Chaos, Beastmen Brayherds, and Tomb Kings of Khemri. And that's it. While that seems like a lot, it actually leaves out just under half of the original armies. Dark Elves, Skaven, Vampire Counts, Demons of Chaos, Ogre Kingdoms, Lizardmen and Chaos Dwarfs will not be involved in the narrative from the Old World, and only receive free PDF army lists on release. This means you can play your armies, which is great, with the trade-off that there won't be any new models released for what could be a very long time. So, where does that leave us? The Old World is returning, which is fantastic. My worry, though, is will it have the momentum at release to carry it over all the hurdles that I've discussed in this video? Or will it not perform financially enough for Games Workshop to justifiably invest in its future and leave it to fade into the background, just continuing the cycle where it left off in 2015? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more hobby content.